We begin this broadcast by telling you about the massive fallout of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Oil prices continue to surge as Western allies of Ukraine battle Russia over oil imports. In the latest, Russia has now threatened to close its main gas pipeline to Germany via Nord Stream 1, in retaliation for the halt on Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia also warned that rejecting Russian oil would have a catastrophic consequence, causing prices to more than double to $300 a barrel. This threat comes as the United States explores the possibility of a potential ban with allies as another way to punish Russia for invading Ukraine. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden spoke to the leaders of France, Germany and Britain as he pushed for their support on the ban. But Germany and the Netherlands have already rejected such a plan. The European Union gets about 40% of its gas and 30% of its oil from Russia and has no easy substitutes if supplies are disrupted. Russia is the world's top producer of natural gas and the second top producer of crude oil, and any move to sanction its energy industry would badly damage not just its own economy but also the global economy. Fears of a possible embargo drove Brent crude oil to $130 a barrel at one point on Monday, and this is the highest level for almost 14 years. Reports now suggest that the US might be willing to move ahead without their Western allies, though no decision has so far been made. The US only gets about 3% of its oil from Russia. The White House said that it was in conversation with large oil producers and suppliers around the world about how to mitigate the impact. For more details about this consequence, we are now being joined by WION's correspondent, Rosie Burchard from Brussels. Rosie, thanks so much for joining us on WION at this hour. Now, as we all know, Russia has threatened to close its main gas pipeline to Germany via the Nord Stream 1. Is Europe at this point at all concerned about the ramifications of this move?
Europe is definitely concerned about its energy dependence on Russia. As you mentioned, Priyanka, the EU gets about 40% of its gas imports from Russia and about 25 to 30% in terms of crude oil. So there's definitely concerns about this, and that is why the European Commission, that's the bloc's executive, is today about to present a plan on how to kind of get rid of this dependence on Russia for energy. Some of those plans include diversifying energy supplies. We know the EU has been in talks over the past few weeks and even months with countries including Qatar and Norway and Nigeria about diversifying those energy supplies. But they're also looking into really ramping up renewable production, although that, of course, is a bit more of a long-term project. There are divisions among the bloc in terms of how to proceed with this potential really tough sanction of a full embargo on Russian oil and gas. We heard from the Lithuanian foreign minister yesterday, Gabrielius Landsbergis, that he said essentially buying Russian oil and gas, it's like buying it with Ukrainian blood. But as you mentioned, Priyanka, the Netherlands and Germany have already voiced their opposition to this, really raising concerns about energy security in Europe.
Absolutely, Rosie. Now let's talk about the bigger theme here, sanctions versus the threat of cutting off gas. We're now seeing the impact of the war across the world. What can Europe do to deter Russia from escalating this crisis at this point?
Well, they are looking into further sanctions still. As I said, there are kind of divisions on that really tough sanction of a full oil embargo, but they are thinking of potentially cutting more Russian banks off from that SWIFT international payment system and looking into some other measures, for example, blocking ports or looking into measures on kind of blocking coal imports. We might see more on that today or even in the coming days. EU leaders are set to meet in Versailles on Thursday and Friday, and they'll likely be looking at that there, kind of those further sanctions to take. But of course, the bigger question is what to do if the sanctions don't work. Sanctions are something that certainly, generally, historically speaking, don't have an impact overnight. And we heard from US Secretary Blinken over the last few days saying that this is not like flipping a switch, so they are seeing some impacts on the Russian economy that suggest, at least from this Western perspective, from these Western powers, that the sanctions are taking a serious toll in Russian economy.
Absolutely. Rosie, just a final question there, talking about the conflict in general. Russia has now declared another ceasefire and says that a string of humanitarian corridors have been opened. But the question is, does Europe trust Russia at this point to adhere to this new ceasefire?
I think trust is not a word that most European leaders would attribute to their feelings towards Russia at this time. We've certainly heard from the French President Macron in the past that he felt Russian President Vladimir Putin had been duplicitous in these diplomatic talks ahead of this invasion. So in terms of moving forward with this diplomacy and potential humanitarian escape routes, we see this as a really case of very high stakes, but unfortunately low expectations from these EU leaders, though they are, of course, very much supporting any way ahead. They think these talks are a step in the right direction, but they really are concerned about this terrible humanitarian impact on the ground. Right now, we're expecting some more measures this afternoon also from the European Union on supporting refugees. As you mentioned, we're now seeing around 2 million people having fled Ukraine into neighbouring countries, many of them in the European Union just in the past couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Rosie Burchard, our correspondent from Brussels, thank you so much for all those insights and perspectives, and thanks for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.